I'm not going to keep you here till tomorrow morning, and you're a knowledgeable audience anyway. I just want to share with you 3 examples of the nature of the challenge in front of us. 3.5 years ago, I traveled to Malmö, Sweden, 3rd largest city in Sweden, just across from Copenhagen. It was a city, by the way, that after the Shoah, many Jews came to recuperate in. And I was there because of a Chabad rabbi named Rabbi Kesselman. Now, Rabbi Kesselman's from Detroit, Michigan. And if you know anything about America, people from Detroit can take care of themselves. And if you know anything about Chabad, they can take care of themselves too. Why was I there? Because Rabbi Kesselman, every Friday night, when he walked from his apartment to shul with his little kids and back, every Shabbat morning, when he did the same, was under severe anti-Semitic harassment, hundreds of times. And I contacted him, and he said, no, the police don't do anything. We're on our own here. We're 700 Jews. I couldn't believe it. Democracy, Sweden. We go there. I met with the mayor. I met with the police chief. I met with the prosecutors. And it became very, very clear that in that city, the city fathers of Malmö were not going to give the full democratic protections to 700 Jewish citizens. They let them twist in the wind. By the way, whenever I go to a community, I try also to meet with other minorities. I met with the leaders of the Roma community. Unbelievable what they go through there. And I went to see the chief imam of the mosque, who'd been there since the early 60s, pretty secular guy. And I asked him, so do you ever have any hate crimes around here? He said, are you kidding? Sure. And how are the police? The police, they never do anything. So it's also important for us to put things in a context. So we decided to put Malmö on, we put out every now and then a warning, an advisory to Jewish travelers that if you have to go to Malmö, be very careful because you may not be safe. And a lot of my colleagues in the States said, there's 700 Jews in Malmö. Why bother? Why focus on that? And I think it's clear. If you're in a democracy, if you're a Jew, you pay your taxes and they won't protect you, that is a problem that could become rampant in many places in Europe, which is exactly the situation we have. Last June, our delegation met with President Hollande at the Élysée Palace. It was one of the most sobering experiences of my life. And he told us that he could confirm as the president of France that 1,000 French-born citizens had left France for Syria and Iraq and trained under ISIS or Al-Qaeda. 31 had been killed in action. Some others had been traumatized. The vast majority have now returned to France. Most of them are armed, and, quote, we have no idea where they are, unquote. Earlier today, I read that the Spanish government says that there are at least 800 trained terrorists that are now back on their radar screen in Europe. The situation in France is such, it's unique in a couple of ways. First, I believe that the French elite get it, meaning they understand finally that this isn't only just about the Jews. They may lose their country. They may lose their way of life. You may have Marine Le Pen walking in and becoming president of that country. Even though the establishment has woken up, it didn't stop Charlie Hebdo. It didn't stop Hyper Cacher. It didn't stop the murders outside the museum in Brussels. And for whatever else, when we deal with these issues, I was just at the Limud, New Zealand, and debates if Bibi should come and tell him to go or not go. Understand that we have a new reality right now. And that new reality is that above and beyond the traditional hatred, the fact that 70 years after the Shoah, most European diplomats and politicians, they're happy to stand in silence for dead Jews. They don't really have too much time to worry about live Jews. On top of all of that, we now have trained killers who have on their list of enemies our people. Many of them also got a lot of help from the Iranian regime. And as Rabbi Heyer, my boss, has said many times, he said, well, let's take a look and see what a poor Iranian regime was able to do. The Amia bombing, state-sponsored Holocaust denial, arming Hezbollah to the teeth, and giving enough money to Hamas to make sure that they would never even have a hudna with Israel. That's what a poor Iran did. And now, unfortunately, with the proposed Iranian nuclear agreement, this regime will now have between $150 billion and $650 billion to play with. And somehow I don't think most of that money is going to go to take care of social programs in Iran. The congressional vote is coming up. I think we still have a chance to win the first round. I'm not sure we have any chance to override a presidential veto. And we're also experiencing, for the first time, the reinsertion of anti-Semitism into the mainstream political debate. And so Chuck Schumer, who is an important Democratic U.S. Senator from New York, whose name comes from Shomer, he's Jewish. He's also Amy Schumer's cousin, but nobody's perfect. He announced that he's going to vote against the deal. Since that day, he has been under attack as a warmonger by Democrats, by activists, as someone who's guilty of dual loyalty. So this Iran shift turns out to be a dramatic one that's going to have implications on the ground, I believe, for every Jewish community around the world. And that challenge still stands in front of us. So 70 years after the Shoah, after the liberation of Auschwitz, what are we supposed to be doing in the diaspora, especially in the great and strong community like Melbourne? Where do we start? So I actually have two more stories that have informed my job description in recent years. A couple of years ago, I was asked to meet the grandson of the founder of modern Sudan, who's an imam from Sudan, to meet him in London. I had gone to Sudan to meet with the tyrants who run the place. That will be for the next time that I come. But he said, you know what? I don't feel comfortable making this a public meeting, so let's meet at the London Hilton. Those of you who travel, by the way, if you ever go to the London Hilton, you get the impression that every single meeting in the London Hilton is from people who don't want to be seen with the other person. It's sort of like you go to the concierge and say, what is your secret meeting? Oh yeah, you're on the 14th floor. Kind of bizarre. So we're going to meet at 2 o'clock. I had to wait by the phone to which room I was going to. What do you bring to an imam? What do you bring to a meeting? And by extension, we all have these opportunities or maybe should take them. So I decided, I brought 3 things to the meeting. I brought a chamsa, which is, by and large, some people tonight are wearing a nice piece of jewelry from the word chamesh, right, the 5 digits, both Arabic and Jewish and against the evil eye and stuff. It's one of the few sort of universal things. I brought a big chamsa with the Birkat Kohanim, the blessing of the priest in Hebrew, because I figured that would give me a chance to also talk about what a bracha is. They have barka, by the way, much different. What a bracha is, what a kohen is. Okay, very nice. And then I brought the imam an idea, a piece of Torah. Now, I have met enough articulate and mostly secular Muslims to know that when you get the same question over and over again, there's a staple question that's asked of Jews if they're honest enough with you. Rabbi, do you believe that the Torah was given by God? Yes. Do you believe the Torah is true? Yes. So it's God's word and it's true. So why aren't you trying to convert me? You must be a racist. That's how many people are raised, unfortunately, in that faith. So against that backdrop, I said to the imam, I would like to share with you Maimonides' view of who is worthy of going to heaven. And I described for him that Rambam, and this is a good time, it's right before Rosh Hashanah, Rambam has this brilliant middle-of-the-road approach. What he basically says is, if you're a decent person, if you do good deeds, and the majority of your deeds are 51% or more, you're going to go to heaven, whether you're Jewish or not. If you're at 49% or worse, you're going somewhere else. And of course, since Rambam was also not just a brilliant philosopher and a writer and an unbelievable Talmud Chacham, he was also a clever Jew. So he said, by the way, if you're trying to figure out the percentile of like taking care of your parents, is that like 10 points or 2 points? Of course, we do not know God's scorecard. So his advice is, approach life that you're always on the 50-yard line, and there's no pressure, but the very next deed that you do will either put you at 51% for good or 51% for evil, and no pressure, but that actually this is also true about families and nations and the entire world. So if you want to know where Jewish guilt comes from, you now know from the Rambam. But the point, and he got the point I wanted to make was, we Jews never claimed exclusive rights to heaven. You don't have to become a Jew to be a Ben Olam Haba. Big shock. But the biggest shock of all was the next thing I brought, my third presentation. I brought my talit and tefillin from the room to show the imam. I took it out, I showed him the talis, I opened up. And this very urbane man who has written beautiful prayers and poetry, really good guy, he looked at me straight in the eye and said, Jews pray? Oh my God, Jews pray? Urbane, religious, sophisticated? So part of the challenge that we have with the Muslim world and our Muslim neighbors is that, you know, there are references to Abraham and Yitzchak and Sarah and Musa, Moshe Rabbeinu, and so Muslims believe they know a lot about us because there are tremendous numbers of references in their holy book that refer to Jews. The truth is, they know zero about who we are and what our values are. And believe me, especially now with the internet and the brilliant marketing of ISIS and others, we all have to become much more active in communicating to our neighbors about what our values are. Because if we don't, there are other folks out there that are ready to fill the vacuum with hate. And that's one of our main challenges ahead of us. We're not in the IDF, we're not guarding the borders, but this is an issue I believe that everyone has to be involved with. And the last incident that changed my life. So one of the great things about being together with Jews if you speak on a Shabbos morning somewhere and you don't do well, they're not shy about letting you know. No pressure tonight with 900 of our closest friends. However, and a lot of you do business in Asia, so you know that I'm right, there is this cultural rule in much of Asia that at the end of a presentation, when they ask you, is there anybody here with a question? Never. In fact, you can talk yourself blue in the face in Japan, in Korea, they nod, etc. And then when you ask, of course, only because I'm a native New Yorker, I've been told, don't end your presentation with the question, does anybody have a question? It makes them feel uncomfortable because culturally, they're coming from a different place. Jews want to ask questions, they want to argue. It doesn't work that way in Asia. So naturally, I was just at Samsung on the way here. I was in Korea for 2 days. I made a presentation to some of their CEOs and a second one to some of the younger people. And of course, at the end, I asked, does anybody have a question? So with the older Korean CEOs, they didn't even flinch. A few of the younger people would have liked to, but culturally wasn't acceptable. So I've been to Japan now about 34 times. I love Japan. I'm not a student of the Japanese culture. They're wonderful people. I think I have violated every conceivable rule of etiquette. I think if I ever get into the Guinness Book of World Records, it'll be because of what I've done in Japan. So they're wonderful people, and we're divided by language, by culture, but like in everything else in life, there are also great people over there. We've done some wonderful things. But because I'm also a little bit of an auction, at the end of every presentation, when we catch one of the companies doing something wrong, and thank God it's happening less and less, during the 80s and 90s, a tremendous outburst of Protocols of Zion and other anti-Semitic books, even though there are no Jews there, kind of a weird phenomenon. But one year, we caught one of the major companies about to publish the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And they know that we can hurt their good name. So what they do, and by the way, I'm thinking of trying to get a patent on this. I can't solve the problems in Europe, but I've come up with a method that makes sure that any company in Asia that has done something incorrectly insofar as the Jewish people, I never have a return customer. Because part of the peace treaty is they have to invite the rabbi over, they have to sit in simultaneous translation for an hour or two, and I know exactly what they're thinking. What do we have to do never to see this man ever, ever again? And it kind of works. So lo and behold, at the end of my presentation where I brought 8 original copies of the protocols in different languages to show to them, the evolution of this book. Like a fool, I said, so, thank you very much. Are there any questions? The executive vice president of this big corporation in front of his peers raises his hand, stands up and says, yes, Rabbi Cooper, we have a question. And he says, first of all, I want to thank you for coming over here, and we now understand that the Jewish people don't go to synagogue on Shabbat morning in order to plan the economic downfall of Japan. And he said, he was deadly serious, and he then went on to really summarize my presentation beautifully. And I said, well, I think you've really summarized what I've said quite well, but what's your question? Rabbi, we would like to know, what do Jewish people do in synagogue? So, I felt from that moment on that my job description changed forever. This is a very important piece of Musar. It's a lesson for each of us who are defenders of Israel, who are always trying our best. We should not play this game by the narrative of the enemy. That in many, many cases, not all, but in many cases, our neighbors have a profound curiosity of, why do you care about that little land over in the Middle East, thousands of kilometers away? What do Jews do in synagogue in Melbourne on Saturday morning? Really some basic stuff that we don't really think about. And so what I try to do ever since that experience in Tokyo, I try to keep that in mind whenever I'm communicating with someone, because it's not so much about what we don't do. We're not this, Israel's not apartheid, Israel's not that, Judaism isn't this, isn't that. We need to make sure that we engage. I think that's really the operative term for those of us who still live in the diaspora. We have to engage. We have to engage our neighbors. We have to share and express and explain our values. And of course, in order to do that, we have to be knowledgeable Jews, which is why I can speak this way in very few communities, maybe Toronto, certainly Melbourne, which you have proud Jews, you have knowledgeable Jews, you know why we support Israel. You've got it. You're all fully loaded, fully equipped. And we live in a time where we all have to engage with our neighbors, because 2015, I think it's extraordinarily important for the Jewish people to put their political and religious differences aside, at least enough in order for us to be able to defend the idea of a Jewish state, to defend the basic values of Judaism. And it also means, and what I'm saying to you, I say to myself, that when we're talking about universities, I think the time has come for us to reconsider sending checks to our alma mater, or even to certain Jewish studies programs, unless and until the people at those schools see to it that our children are not intimidated, that the voices of academics who dare to be Zionists have a place at the table. One of the biggest sins we need to clop on this Yom Kippur is, we spoke about it this morning at the school. Here we are with grade 12 kids full of enthusiasm, and coming in the next semester around the world, yesterday's 12th grader is now the frontline soldier to defend Israel from an onslaught of sophisticated professors, certain well-paid student groups, international attacks by BDS movements. We cannot just send our kids out to battle, and here they are just learning to get the basics of how to be at a university. We have to make sure that we empower our children with knowledge, that we don't leave these battles only to them, and that we use our considerable muscle and influence, if we have it, and if we don't, we find out how to express it, to make sure that our children aren't bullied and that our values are not soiled and stomped on. Because I am a member of the clergy, although I don't rabbinate, I give out Laffy Taffies at the synagogue in West Los Angeles, paid for by the dentists in my community on Shabbat morning. I'm old school. I believe Jewish kids can't get enough sugar on Shabbat morning. I'm a grandfather already, couldn't care less what the young parents have to say. So there's an interesting, very interesting halacha we're going to read in a week or two about a mitzvah. And it's interesting that it's called a mitzvah because it's just common sense. It says when you build a home, you have to put up a fence, a ma'akeh. If it's a second story, you are required to put up a fence on the second floor balcony to make sure that nobody would fall and, God forbid, be killed. In the Talmud, the Gemara, Rashi, and others discuss the fact that this halacha is exclusively for a private home, but not for a communal building, not for a Beit Midrash, not for a yeshiva, not for a synagogue, and in a sense, kind of counterintuitive, you would think. Especially today, we have very specific security needs involving police. But what's the concept behind the fact that the ma'akeh is only required, and in fact, some say you make a blessing, like you put up a mezuzah, when you finish that fence, you make a blessing. It's a religious imperative to see to it that someone is not harmed as a result of coming to your home. And my visit to Melbourne actually, I think, provides the basis for the answer. The bottom line is that we are each individually part of that collective fence. We are the chains in that link fence. We collectively stand together and put up that fence that will help our kids from not falling out, and will also be strong enough to defend ourselves against the enemy. And what that really means is that when we talk about Klal Yisrael, we talk about the Jewish people, we are only as strong as the weakest link in that fence. It's a wonderful opportunity for me to have come here to one of the strongest parts of the fence of Klal Yisrael, to be back in Melbourne, and to have addressed you this evening. God bless you, and God bless the State of Israel.
I think that we speak for all of us, Rabbi Cooper, that tonight we have witnessed something very special. And you mentioned Dr. Martin Luther King, and Dr. Martin Luther King once said, "An individual has not started living until he can rise above the confines of his individualistic concerns to the broader concerns of all humanity." This quote is a perfect embodiment of the heroic and remarkable contribution tonight's orator, Rabbi Abe Cooper, has made to Israel and to the Jewish people over many decades. I am sure that, like me, you were all moved and struck by Rabbi Cooper's exceptional dedication, his strong leadership, and his love for the Jewish people. And I personally, and I think I speak for all the people who are here, Rabbi, I feel very fortunate to hear from you, an individual who has gone above and beyond the call of duty for his people. And you've inspired us to reflect that we are all entrusted with the responsibility to act tirelessly to eradicate anti-Semitism and to act against racism wherever it is. Abe, you reminded us that selfless dedication and fighting for a cause greater than ourselves are not quaint relics of a bygone era. You have moved us and you've inspired us with your words and your actions. You remind us that the phrase "never again" is not just a slogan, but is a living, driving force for the defenders of the Jewish people. Abe, we wish you much success and strength in continuing the sacred mission of standing up and speaking out for Israel and the Jewish people. On behalf of all of us here tonight, we thank you for your breathtaking address and for the insight and importance about having a purpose that you shared with us. Ladies and gentlemen, can you please join me in thanking Rabbi Abe Cooper. I have a small gift, well, it's not that small, but I have a gift for Rabbi Cooper. It is a beautiful challah plate, so when you're having challah in Los Angeles, you will remember the sweet times that you had in Melbourne. It is engraved with the following: presented to the 2015 ADC Gandel Orator, Rabbi Abraham Cooper, August, Melbourne, 2015. Rabbi Abraham Cooper. Thank you and good night.